Hello, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar with Reveal Mobile, Marketing Attribution, Retail Foot Traffic, and the Digital Marketer. My name is Lizzie Roth, and I am a Senior Account Manager for Locology, and I will be your host for today's event. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin. This webinar is being recorded and will be circulated to all attendees with the presentation within 24 hours of the broadcast. Questions will be answered during the Q&A session at the end. You can, however, ask questions at any time during the broadcast by using the question window in your control panel. Our speaker today is Dan Dillon. Dan is Vice President of Marketing at Reveal Mobile. During his 15-plus-year career as a marketing executive, he has led every aspect of marketing, from traditional to digital and inbound to outbound. Dan is based in Raleigh, North Carolina, where Reveal Mobile is headquartered. Without further ado, I will hand things over to you, Dan.
All right, great, Lizzie. Thanks so much. I appreciate the introduction, and I really appreciate everyone joining us today on today's webinar, wherever you may be in the world. We are very glad you've come to hear about marketing attribution and retail foot traffic. Let me walk through just a couple of agenda items to set the stage here. We're going to start the webinar by talking through some fundamentals around foot traffic attribution. Then I'm going to spend a moment just to build the argument, really, about why attribution is so hard. And then from there, we're going to go into how attribution is measured, sort of on a continuum from easy to difficult. And then I want to talk for a while about how to solve decisively for foot traffic attribution. And then we'll end the webinar by talking about steps you can take to get started on your journey, wherever you may be in that process. And we'll talk through a brief case study, actually, which features an amusement park and foot traffic there. And then, of course, we'll wrap up with Q&A. And I do want to encourage everybody on the webinar today to ask questions whenever they occur to you. By all means, we're happy to answer any questions. So enter those into the questions box. And of course, Lizzie will walk us through those as we wrap up. So with that, let me start with a couple of fundamentals on foot traffic attribution. And I'm actually going to back up one step and talk for a minute about foot traffic analytics. So just to define some terms and to provide a few visuals here, I want to get everyone on the same page by talking about the basis of foot traffic attribution. So if you know what kind of impact a campaign has, of course, on real world traffic, you have to know what your baseline is before the campaign takes flight. So that's where foot traffic analytics comes in. And here you're looking at the volume of people who visit a physical location within a specific time frame, right? Effectively it quantifies in-store visits. So what you're looking at in the graphic is foot traffic for Chipotle restaurants in the US, right? And this serves as the foundation for attribution. Just looking at the charts here from left to right, you can see that Chipotle has seen a 7% decline in visits in the last 4 weeks. You can see that nearly half of Chipotle's visitors live or work within 5 miles of the restaurant they ate at. You can see that nearly 70% are one-time diners, 30% only come back, or rather come back more than once. And then you can also see that a decent portion of the people who eat at Chipotle also eat at Dunkin' Donuts, Subway, McDonald's, and the like. So this gives us sort of a baseline for understanding foot traffic attribution. So let's define that as a term. Attribution, plain and simple, ties ad exposure to real world actions, right? Namely in-store visits for the sake of this webinar. And that's it. Whatever other definitions you may have heard or maybe swirling around, that's really the crux of it. And the people who rely on foot traffic attribution are agencies, brands, of course, that run campaigns to drive traffic to specific locations. And while that fundamentally makes it a campaign metric, it's really also a business metric because it can connect a business with the ability to measure and forecast sales, plan inventory, even make larger decisions around staffing, real estate, and then so on. So at the end of the day, foot traffic attribution has fundamental value because it quantifies the impact of digital and out-of-home ad spend on in-store visits. So let's take a look at another type of visualization here. So what you're looking at in this graphic is an example of foot traffic attribution for Walmart in Raleigh, North Carolina. So a very specific geography for Walmart. Obviously a prolific advertiser. Now, we didn't actually run a campaign on behalf of Walmart, so the data here is really just dummy data as sort of a proxy for what might appear in an actual attribution report. So in the graph on the left, you can see here that the change in in-store visitors during the hypothetical campaign that Walmart ran, comparing it to 4 weeks prior. And then you can also see the percentage of campaign conversions in the middle, right? The number of customers who converted as a result of the campaign. And you can also see how foot traffic to Walmart and other stores in the category changed during the campaign. And this table on the right shows where Walmart likely got its visitors from during the campaign, focusing on those retailers that saw a drop in their daily visitors per store during the campaign, right? So all told, this type of view gives a very clear-cut insight into the impact that Walmart's hypothetical ad campaign had on foot traffic to stores. So unequivocal and clear, but it's not always that simple. So now that we've defined terms and laid out some of those visuals, I want to dig in for a moment as to why foot traffic attribution can be so hard to measure. So first and foremost, the reason is there are way too many ways to measure it, right? And that's why I wanted to set out at the top of the webinar by talking about sort of a conclusive method for measuring foot traffic attribution. And we also know that data can reside in way too many different systems that are disparate, don't talk to each other, and it makes that data difficult to aggregate with any sense of reliability, right? So what you're looking at on the left, the colorful wheel, is the Mobile Marketing Association's multi-touch attribution data map. And this, of course, encompasses far more than just foot traffic attribution, but it's really indicative of the complexity marketers like us face when we're having to grapple with attribution. So it's sort of dizzying to think about that wheel and where you start. So on the right-hand side of the screen, on a much more straightforward level, you have foot traffic attribution. And I really want to simplify things for the sake of making this approachable. So take a look at the right side of your screen for a minute. Here you have the ingredients to get at foot traffic attribution. You have data related to ads or media, and then channels. Then you have audience visit data, the people who show up at your locations. And then lastly, you have transaction data. And we'll dig into transaction data here in a minute, which can be difficult to ascertain and pull together, but we'll dig into that in a minute. And I want to acknowledge that there is more than one way to determine how foot traffic was affected by an ad or a campaign. And frankly, brands and agencies have been doing that for a very long time. So that brings us to our continuum, right? So from left to right, you've got different ways to measure foot traffic attribution, from sort of easy on the left to difficult on the right. Let me step through this. So one of the easiest ways to solve for foot traffic attribution is simply by asking the question, hey, how did you hear about us at the point of sale or even after the point of sale through some sort of survey? And while it's easy to gather that data, it also allows a marketer to determine the impact of both online and offline channels, because you can simply ask that question. But all that to say, it's really not reliable, because frankly, a lot of consumers don't bother to answer the survey, and the data becomes pretty sparse pretty fast. So moving down that continuum, marketers might use coupon codes or even campaign-specific phone numbers, depending on what you're running in terms of an e-commerce operation, what have you. And codes are typically campaign-specific and can easily tie to ads and in-store traffic. But this option has weak points as well. Customers might forget the coupon code, they might forget the mailer that you sent them, what have you, right? So there are definitely breakage points in that continuum as well. So from there, we get into location-based foot traffic attribution and pixel tracking, which I'm going to go into here more deeply in a moment. And then at the hard end of the scale, all the way to the right, there's point of sale integration that ties everything together. Now, point of sale and transaction data intersect with several layers of any marketing tech stack, and the data can be siloed and frankly hard to integrate. Brands and retailers run, as you know, multiple systems depending on how large your organization is. If you're a multinational retailer, you've got a highly complex tech stack. And even if you're a mid-sized brand, you certainly have complexity in your technology. And all this requires integration, right? And that translates into engineering time, it translates into dollars, and it translates, frankly, into slow attribution reports. So I want to go a level deeper just for a second before we talk about location data, and talk about for a minute how the Location-Based Marketing Association takes this a level deeper and actually 3 levels deeper, if you will. So what the LBMA, and if you're not familiar with the Location-Based Marketing Association, it's a great organization to follow for additional insight into location-based marketing. And to make this super easy, the LBMA uses a cake visual, right? Not a bad thing to have. At the bottom layer of this cake, you have attribution at the store visit level, sort of what we've been talking about so far on the webinar. And this is about driving traffic to a location. Maybe it's a concert venue, maybe it's an auto dealership, maybe it's a hardware store, maybe it's a donut shop. It really could be anything, right? Then you move up to the second layer, and that middle layer is how the visitor engaged while in the store. This includes dwell time. It includes how they might be enticed to buy higher value items while in the store, or maybe how they pay special attention to an in-store promotion. And this is also the layer that directs additional salespeople in a highly complex environment, directs additional salespeople to areas of the sales floor that are especially busy, right? So if there's a mass influx of people who want to buy shoes and there's no one in the shoe section, it can move salespeople to that area. And then the top layer is what happens at checkout when you take your item to the cashier and pay, or frankly, if you pay via mobile app inside the store anywhere, it's what happens during that transaction and what the consumer actually buys and how much they actually spend. And this is, without a doubt, the hardest part of the cake to solve, I guess, to mix metaphors, forgive me. And each of these layers, of course, is supported by technology. And it's the point of sale sort of transactional level at the top that includes heavy industrial strength systems like CRMs, point of sale systems, loyalty management, and these require very tight integrations. Now that said, the mortar, or actually maybe the frosting that holds all these layers together is location data. So using location data as the frosting, brands can attribute in-store visits to ads served and ultimately to sales made. So before I go into sort of how to track attribution at the campaign level, I want to talk for a second about location data itself and how that sort of works at the technology level. So I want to unpack the key here. What I'm really doing is unpacking the key here to foot traffic attribution and take a look at how location-based or location data works, starting with how the data is sourced and then how it flows through to you as a marketer so you can make the most of it. So the vast majority of location-based marketing is powered by opted-in GPS data. So that means when you or I, or anybody for that matter, opts in to share our location with a mobile app on our phone, the latitude and longitude coordinates are gathered from that app, and that's what powers your ability as a marketer to target those individuals or understand if they return to a store, what have you, right? And GPS data is really the most accurate and also has the most meaningful scale. There are other ways to, of course, identify someone's location, but they're far less precise and far less accurate in that regard. So it's always good to have GPS data as the underpinning. And the process looks like this. The GPS data is ingested, it's aggregated, and then it's anonymized to prevent the identification of individuals. We don't need to know that this person is Sally and this person is Tim. We just need to know that there is an audience and that there is foot traffic, right? And that makes sure the data is privacy compliant. So there's obviously a lot of issues around privacy and security that need to be considered, and that's something you want to adhere to. Then the data is matched to places. It's one thing to have latitude and longitude, but it's another thing to know what kind of store lives at those coordinates. Is it a cinema? Is it a football stadium? Is it a public park? Is it an outdoor equipment store? It could be anything, right? So matching those coordinates to what's actually in physical space is super important, and keeping track of that POI database, that place of interest database, is very important. And then the next step, which is really optional, is enriching the data. And this might involve appending demographic or behavioral insights to the location data itself. And this is generally done with a customer data platform or some other piece of the MarTech stack. Then we get to the 3 core elements on the right-hand side of your screen of location-based marketing: analytics, audiences, and attribution. And the analytics piece I talked through at the top of the webinar enables you to understand your target audience based on where they shop, how often they shop at those places, how far they travel to get there. And this lets you get smarter about your potential ad spend. Once you understand these things, you want to have a method for building location-based audiences to market to. And this is most easily done via a user interface that you can log into directly, enabling you to really self-serve and get precisely the audiences you want that are hyper-targeted. And then you want to be able to push those audiences to a demand-side platform or maybe a social platform, Facebook, Twitter, what have you, so you can serve ads and drive activations. And then lastly, you want to be able to understand how your ads perform. Of course, that's the attribution piece, allowing or showing you who among your audience went to the retailer you're advertising, or visit the location you want your audience to visit, right? Could be anything, as we've talked about. It'll be an amusement park here in a minute. I'll show you a case study at the end of the webinar. So now that we have that view into location data, I want to dig deeply into how the attribution process actually plays out in a couple of examples here. So to start, let's say we build an audience based on places people have visited, right? Let's say we create an audience made up of everyone who went to Chipotle in North Carolina, where Reveal Mobile is based. And let's say we look at everyone who went to Chipotle over the past 3 months. So from that, we get an audience of, and this is hypothetical, 100,000 people, right? So we now have an audience of 100,000 mobile devices, and we can take that audience and load it into a demand-side platform, a Trade Desk, Data Zoo, Centro, what have you, and we can run a campaign. Or frankly, we can push that audience into Facebook and run a campaign. So let's say we use Facebook's custom audiences feature. Everyone, I suppose, advertises on social media here on the webinar, so you're probably very accustomed to building custom audiences on Facebook. You can push those mobile ad IDs into Facebook and match those to everyone who has an account on Facebook. And let's say there's a 75% match rate, leaving you with 75,000 people to market to. So we run our ads, we promote the burrito or whatever it is that Chipotle has, and then we use the same software or service to see who returns to Chipotle, effectively tracking return visits during the campaign and after the campaign. And in this case, we can see that 40,000 people came back to Chipotle, and these return visits can be analyzed both during or after the campaign, which is a critical piece. Most attribution reports require a waiting period. With the right kind of software and the right kind of visibility, you can see when people return to the store mid-flight, so you can make adjustments on your campaign before it's even run its course. So let's take another look at foot traffic attribution, this time with pixel tracking, which is a more complex but more granular way of looking at attribution. So pixel tracking allows marketers to link distinct audiences and unique ads together. So attribution here in this case becomes even more watertight. So let's say we build that same audience of 100,000 Chipotle diners using the location data, and then using the marketer's tech stack. Could be Google Marketing Platform, could be Adobe Marketing Cloud, whatever the case might be. That audience is matched and served pixeled ads to promote the same burrito that we're promoting. And of those 60, let's say hypothetical 60,000 people who were served the ad, 35,000 people actually saw it. And we know they saw it because they were pixeled, right? Then going back into the Google Marketing Platform or Adobe, what have you, we can see that 20,000 who were served that ad, that pixeled ad, returned to Chipotle, right? So that ties ads directly to the people who saw them and came back, which is a much more specific way, as I mentioned, of tracking foot traffic attribution. So not all location data is created equal and managed equal, and it's important to understand that when you're working with it, it's good to ask your provider pointed questions about two things: audiences and places. So that way your campaign and your attribution efforts can be as reliable and as actionable as possible. So what I have here on the screen are two sets of questions, as I mentioned, one around audiences and one around places. And I'm going to step through these and talk through not just the question, but what you should be looking for in the answer when you ask your vendor, hey, tell me about your audiences, or hey, tell me about your places. So in this first question, when you're asking about verifying audiences that are privacy compliant, what you're looking for your vendor to tell you is that they are CCPA compliant. Here in the United States, there's a law in California called the California Consumer Privacy Act, and your location data provider has to be compliant with that, treating it effectively as national legislation, even though it's not yet. That's the best practice. You also want to make sure that your vendor's dealing with GPS data. Other types might be IP address data, Wi-Fi data, bid stream data, all of that is inferior in terms of accuracy and quality. So make sure you're sourcing the highest quality GPS data. And then you also want to make sure that your vendor is honoring all people who opt out. So if I say, don't share my location, I would never appear in an addressable audience, and that's really critical. The next thing you want to know is how your vendor stamps their data with time, right? It's one thing to build an audience sort of looking back indiscriminately, not as helpful as looking back at a very specific time frame. So you want to make sure that your vendor is assigning and provides timestamps for all events captured per device. And you want to make sure that the vendor provides that timestamp as part of the data feed that they're offering you, so you can build custom audiences for time periods that you specify. The next question on the list here is around scale, right? How much data do you have ultimately? And what you're looking for here is the number of daily active users. This is really the number that serves as a baseline for the number of mobile users you'll be able to build an audience from and campaign against, and of course, drive attribution for. That's sort of a top level number. The next sort of number you're looking for around scale is events per device, and that's a question of depth. This is really the number of places a device will show up as it moves through a commercial district, right? So the more events per device, the more likely you are to see a device show up at the places you care about, right? And then last on the audience list is around how up to date your audiences are, how often are they refreshed. And in order to build attribution reports in real time and understand how your campaign is performing day to day, your audience really should be refreshed every 24 hours. You shouldn't need to wait 30 days or 15 days, what have you. It really should be day to day. The next section here on the list is around places, and this is just as important as audiences because this is where it gets into accuracy and of course attribution. So when asking your vendor around place information comprehensiveness, you want to understand how many places of interest the vendor has in their database. And I'd say an average POI database, let's say in the US only, has about 10 million places of interest. That's going to get you roughly every store, every chain, every retailer. A larger POI database, say upwards of maybe 15 million places, is going to get you recreational areas, auto dealerships, event venues, stadiums, places that aren't traditional retail, but that may be just as important to your business. Let's say you run a golf course operation, or let's say you run a set of resorts in the country and you want to draw people to those resorts. Those might not be in an average sized POI database, but they'll certainly be in a larger database. So you want to make sure you understand how big that is. And then there's a question around place information precision. And this is where you want to ask about the vendor's POI database and its ability to discern between large structures such as shopping malls and airports and individual retail locations within those structures. So it's one thing to target, Mall of America in Minnesota. It's a whole nother thing to target the Nordstrom inside of Mall of America. So you want to have specificity and the luxury of granularity there. And the same thing with airports. It's one thing to target, LaGuardia in New York. It's a whole other question to target all of the Starbucks inside of LaGuardia. So that's a key consideration there. As far as verifying place information and compensating for bad addresses, you want to make sure that your vendor is regularly updating their POI database and matching it to latitude and longitude. In other words, is it a managed POI database, or is it something that is just sort of, we hope it's accurate, we'll do our best. So definitely something to scrutinize. And then lastly, as far as filtering out places you don't care about, a lot of audience databases like to go and get coffee drinkers or movie lovers or sports fanatics. Those are pretty generic audiences that aren't going to get you a high ROI. What you want to be able to do is filter out locations that you don't care about. Maybe you don't care about a certain type of movie theater. Maybe you don't care about a certain type of sport. So you want to make sure you can get down to a level of filtering that lets you target based on your campaign's specific needs. So with that, be sure you scrutinize each opportunity or each vendor you work with to know what they're offering you. And with that, I think we've moved on to our poll. So Lizzie, I'll transition to you here and let you run the poll for folks. So if you would, take a second to answer this question. how would you describe your current ability to measure foot traffic attribution today, right? And you can select one on this scale, right? You have it down, you could present this webinar, you're pretty good at it, but there's always room for improvement. Early days, you've got a long way to go. There's sort of discussions to be had there. The last measure, yeah, well, not really even able to do it. And then the last one is, frankly, you just don't know. So take a second, if you would, and provide your answer to that question if you haven't yet. Have we got most everyone's answer, Lizzie?
Yes, we do.
Great. Let's see what we got.
So it looks like we have 11% have nailed it. 18% said we're pretty good, but we could do better. 38% early days. 23% measure, yeah, about that. And 13% said, I don't know.
Okay, that's great insight. Thank you for sharing that. You can go ahead and close the poll if you want, and I'll go back to the slides. So just a quick observation on those answers. What I heard Lizzie say was most folks are not at the top of their game in terms of attribution, which is not surprising. Don't be discouraged. As I mentioned, attribution is hard. That's why you're on this webinar, to learn more. So take heart knowing that there are ways to solve for it. In fact, that's what we're going to go into next here. So I want to bring it all together and just set out some steps you can take to get started on foot traffic attribution, regardless of where you are in your poll response or on your journey to measure attribution. So the first thing you want to do is define what attribution means to you. And this is a critical step. So I might have oversimplified, risked oversimplifying at the top of the webinar by saying it's one thing. But the truth is, it could mean a lot of things, and you need to define it internally with your organization. Is it getting people to visit a place? Okay, great, then that's pretty straightforward. Or is it getting them to visit on a certain date or within a certain window of time? That's another sort of definition, right? Or is it about having people visit a location and do business and transact while they're there? That's a whole other definition. Or in some cases, it could even mean getting a very specific audience to take a singular action, such as buying a specific bottle of shampoo or attend a specific event, along a 4-day stretch, whatever the case might be. So once you have that definition set out, and it could vary based on campaign, of course, or client, if you're an agency or media, it won't always be static. You want to be able to figure out what an acceptable return on investment will be. Are you just measuring traffic, how many people showed up at a certain location? Or at the other end of the continuum, are you measuring, sales achieved on a certain calendar date, whatever the case might be? So figure out what your ROI is going to be. And this is often a determination that's made in concert with other teams. So if you're on the marketing team, you're going to want to make that determination in concert with your product team, perhaps, your sales team, your finance team. It could vary, right? So don't feel like you need to do this in a bubble. It does take collaboration and problem solving as a group. And then lastly, I'd be remiss not to mention this. Know what solutions are available to you that can support your attribution efforts. Now, you've seen here how there are a range of scenarios where attribution plays a role and ought to be factored in. And really the easiest place to start, and this may seem like a no-brainer, but I'll just say it, the easiest place to start is with a keyword search, foot traffic attribution, and see what comes up, right? You're going to get results that way from various vendors who are trying to sell to you. So let me close the webinar with a case study. And before I go into this case study, I just want to remind everybody to please do ask questions at any time. If they're in your head now and you want to get them out, go ahead and type them into the questions box. If during the case study they occur to you, or you sort of refine your thinking, please ask those at the time they occur to you, and we will answer those here in due course. So this case study focuses on an agency, Plunge Digital, and their work with a theme park in Arkansas, actually, called Magic Springs Theme and Water Park. So Plunge Digital wanted for the client to boost visits to the park during the 4th of July holiday here in the US, right? So major summer holiday, great time to go to the theme park. And specifically, the park wanted to get attendance to their July 6th fireworks show. This was this was their ROI, right? They knew very specifically, they didn't just want people to show up during the holiday, they wanted people to show up also on July 6th, knowing that there was money to be made across the entire long weekend here in the States. And of course, for the agency, their goal was to earn the theme parks business year after year, right? Earn that repeat business. So what did Plunge Digital do? The first thing they did was they identified their target audience based on their own proprietary social intelligence and analytics platform. And you can see here on the slide, their own tech stack allowed them to see into income, see into age, that type of thing. And then they also needed to marry that data with location data, as I talked about earlier. And they targeted and pulled custom audiences from a product called Visit Local. From there, they executed social and digital display ads targeting that audience. So here's sort of the breakdown of what that looks like. They pulled visitors from select locations who visited between April 1st and June 22nd, 2019, so before the July 4th holiday. And they knew that people who went to the theme park had an affinity for this Oaklawn Racing Casino Resort. So they pulled audiences from the casino between those dates. They also knew, based on their own social analytics, that people had an affinity for eating at Subway and Taco Bell who went to the theme park. So they geofenced these locations and they looked at all the visitors between those dates, April 1 and June 22, and they ultimately pulled out an audience of about roughly 28,000 people from this product, Visit Local. They then served that audience social ads, display ads importantly, between June 22nd and July 6th. These were the critical dates that they wanted to get people into the park. And they served a total of 400,000 impressions, 200 per channel, right? Social and display. And here's what happened. Of that audience, 6.6% visited the park. 1,832 people visited Magic Springs from that audience during June 22nd to July 6th. And then as far as the fireworks show goes, which was part of their way of measuring success, of that audience, 575 people who were targeted went ahead and stayed for the fireworks show. So a very clear, definitive ROI in terms of what foot traffic attribution was able to show them using location data. So a nice, clean picture into performance. And with that, I think, Lizzie, we've come to the Q&A portion. How are we looking on questions?
Okay, perfect. We have lots of good questions. So I will go ahead and pick some of them so we can get started. So
Excellent.
The first one I have is, how do we build an audience? How do we obtain that data?
Great question. So as I mentioned, there are ways you can go get audiences that are sort of generic, right? You can get coffee drinkers, you can get movie lovers, sports fanatics, what have you. But the granularity there is suspect, right? You're not getting the specificity you want. So this Visit Local product allows you to go in and geofence specific retail locations, specific physical locations, doesn't need to be retail at all. As I mentioned, it could be golf courses, could be theme parks, what have you. And it allows you to find audiences that show up at those locations specifically. And you can look back 30 days, 60 days, as far back as up to a year to see who showed up at those locations. And then what Visit Local allows you to do is pull those audiences out of the software. You can literally get mobile ad IDs out of that software and push them into a Facebook or a demand side platform and run ads that you would normally run, right? So very clean.
Okay, great. The next question we had was, you suggested GPS data is better than Wi-Fi detection. Can you explain that statement?
Sure, absolutely. So let me use something everyone's familiar with. Google Maps. You pull up Google Maps, you're in the middle of Midtown Manhattan and you're looking for coffee. So you pull up Google Maps and you type in coffee near me, right? We all do that. And you see yourself as a blue dot. Around that blue dot is sort of a halo, right? A larger blue dot that has a very tight perimeter or a very large perimeter or radius, whatever the word is. The larger that radius, the less confident Google is in your location. The smaller that lighter blue dot, the more confident Google is in that in your location. So GPS data is what allows Google Maps to know you're on Fifth Avenue, not Sixth Avenue, because it gets to that level of specificity. GPS coordinates, if you've seen them expressed as decimal points, go to, I don't know, 9 or 10 places in decimal places. GPS data in location-based marketing will often go to 6 decimal places, which translates roughly to a meter in physical space, 36 inches, 38 inches, whatever a meter is, right? So you know that a person is literally inside of a geofence with GPS data versus some other source. So it does get very specific and very valuable.
Okay, great. Then we have, do you have solutions for longer term sales cycles? Can you track when an ad causes a referral, for example, like a family member?
Okay, that's a great question. And actually, what that question is predicated on is knowing all the devices that live inside of a home. So Reveal Mobile does not follow devices home. We don't follow devices to work. We follow devices, of course, to retail locations, places people shop, places people go for entertainment, that type of thing. So it's not possible today for us to know that your husband or your wife may have also shopped at a store because that device shows up in the same residence as your device. That would require data science. It would require privacy issues that frankly are beyond the current scope. So much more complex and not something we would do today.
Okay. Another one was, are you picking up GPS data when people turn on location services inside of an app?
That's exactly right. So when you opt into locations, sharing your location with an app, that basically gives us permission to build you into a larger audience. Again, you're anonymized. We don't know if you're a man or a woman, if you're 35 years old or 65 years old or 18 years old. All we know is that the device that's in your purse or in your pocket showed up at Starbucks or showed up at the hardware store, whatever the case might be.
Okay, perfect. And I'll do one more. What do you mean by match rate for Facebook custom audiences?
Oh, sure. So when you download mobile ad IDs from Visit Local, all you're getting is a string of alphanumeric characters. It doesn't mean anything to the naked eye, right? When you upload that CSV, that spreadsheet into Facebook as a custom audience, Facebook also has mobile ad IDs because when you log into the Facebook app on your phone, your mobile ad ID is associated with your account. So when you upload an audience of 100,000 people into Facebook, Facebook is looking for those same mobile ad IDs in their account list. And let's say it's probably safe to say that 100% of people who carry a mobile device don't use Facebook. So on average, when we upload a mobile ad ID list into Facebook, we'll see a match rate of anywhere from, let's say, 70 to 85%. So it's basically just matching the mobile ad ID from Visit Local to the mobile ad ID on the Facebook platform that allows you to then advertise to that audience.
Okay, great. Well, I know there were some other questions, and those will be given to Dan and his team. So you guys will get an answer to those outside of the webinar. So don't think that your question was not answered. So thanks again, Dan. Those were some great questions from everyone and a great discussion. And again, thank you to Reveal Mobile for putting all of this together.
My pleasure. Great to be with everyone today.
Yes, totally. So just a few more items from Locology before we end today's webinar. You will be able to view today's broadcast along with previous webinars on our website, locology.com. You just navigate to the Research and Resources button and navigate down to webinars. We still have our event coming up, our big annual one. So join us for our main annual conference, Locology 2020 in San Antonio, March 16th through 18th. Our annual conference brings together leaders and locals from across the United States and internationally for discussion, education, and networking. We'll define what winning in local looks like in 2020 and share our vision for how the local market will change radically by 2025. Registration is open, and you can find more information on our website. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please be sure to visit locology.com and subscribe for updates to be the first to know about future webinars. I hope you guys all have a great day. Thank you so much again.